When Christopher Columbus thought he found India in 1492, there were about 600 distinct tribes spread across North America, from the upper reaches of Canada to Central America. Some estimates put the total population of indigenous North Americans at 10 to 20 million. That's a lot of diversity and a lot of people. They had distinct cultures, rituals, and customs, and a lot of the most interesting revolved around love and marriage. From women making the rules, to playing sports to win hearts, to famous historical figures and their lost or found loves, here's what love and marriage was like for Native Americans. Flute courtship. Music has always been a good way to someone's heart. A decent love ballad can work wonders towards your goal of wooing the person you have your eye on. Ah, yes. And it was no different from many Native American tribes. Tribes across the plains, in particular, knew their way around a flute, and the men often used the instruments to convince women that they'd be a good fit for marriage. The flute courtship ritual is a traditional courtship practice that was used by the Kiowa people, a Native American tribe that historically lived on the southern Great Plains in what is now Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. The ritual has also been practiced by the Comanche, the Navajo, and the Sioux. The ritual involves a man playing a wood flute to express his feelings to a woman he's into. As Europeans introduced rifles and gunpowder to Native American tribes, gun barrels were even sometimes repurposed into courting flutes, an unlikely combination of love and death. During the courtship ritual, the man would play a series of songs on the flute, each with a specific meaning. Some songs might express the man's desire to court the woman, while others might convey his love and devotion to her. The woman would listen to the songs and respond with her own song, either accepting or rejecting the man's advances. The flute courtship ritual was significant because it was an important way for young people to find romantic partners and start families. It was also a way for people to express themselves creatively through music and to connect with the spiritual world. There are not many specific examples of flute courtship among well-known Native Americans, but one that is quite possibly true is during the courtship between a Navajo leader named Manuelito and the daughter of a prominent Navajo chief, Narbona. Manuelito, who lived from 1818 to 1893, was known for his resistance against both Spanish and American forces in the Southwest, including the Navajo Wars of the mid-1800s. Manuelito cut his teeth in the 1830s fighting against the Mexican army during the invasion of Navajo lands. He quickly rose through the ranks and became a prominent leader among his people. By the 1850s, the U.S. government had begun expanding their presence in the Southwest, and tensions between the Navajo and U.S. military began to escalate. In 1860, Manuelito led a raid on a U.S. military fort in the New Mexico Territory, which resulted in the death of several soldiers. The U.S. military responded by launching a campaign to basically wipe out the Navajo people, and Manuelito became one of the primary leaders of the resistance. Over the next few years, Manuelito and his warriors engaged in a series of battles with U.S. troops, using hit-and-run tactics to disrupt supply lines and raid settlements. In 1864, the U.S. military launched a massive campaign against the Navajo, known as the Navajo Long Walk. Manuelito and his people were forced to surrender and were marched over 300 miles to a reservation in eastern New Mexico. Manuelito spent quite a few years living on the reservation, but he continued fighting, this time more through politics than gunpowder. In 1868, he was one of the signatories of the Treaty of Bosque Redondo, which allowed the Navajo to finally return to their homeland. At the beginning of all this, though, was his courtship with the daughter of Narbona. Narbona was a Navajo chief with whom Manuelito had joined up with early on. Manuelito was apparently attracted to the chief's daughter, to whom he started playing his flute. Manuelito seems to have been a pretty good flute player, and Narbona's daughter agreed. Despite her numerous suitors, the daughter of Narbona was wooed by Manuelito's playing and agreed to marry him. The two were wed in a traditional Navajo ceremony, and their marriage was said to have been a happy one. That is, until you realize that later Manuelito is said to have married one of his Mexican indentured servants, a woman named Juanita, later on in his life. Manuelito apparently owned quite a few people from all the raiding he did on both Mexicans and other Native American tribes like the Utes and the Hopi. The story here gets a bit murky. Some sources say Narbona's daughter was also named Juanita, though they were probably not the same person. Either way, marrying someone you own is a bit less romantic than wooing them with the sweet sound of flute music. Cherokee courting stickball. Just like today, the Native Americans had jocks looking to impress women with their athletic prowess and skill on the court or field. But for the Cherokee, there was a sport that served that purpose for sure, but also carried with it a deeply spiritual side that was vital for maintaining peace within and among tribes. Cherokee stickball, also known as Ani Jodi or Little Brother of War, is a traditional Native American game played by several southeastern states, including the Cherokee. The game originated thousands of years ago and was played for a few different reasons, including as a way to resolve conflicts between tribes, to honor their creator, and as a courtship ritual. In Cherokee culture, stickball was seen as a way for young men to prove their courage and skill to potential partners. The game was also associated with the Cherokee dualistic belief system, which held that the world was divided into two forces, the red force representing war, destruction, and aggression, and the white force representing peace, creation, and cooperation. Basically all opposing concepts, like war versus peace, passive versus active, young versus old, internal versus eternal, were represented through the white and red duality. Stickball was seen as an embodiment of this duality, with the opposing teams representing one of the two forces. Before the game, the Cherokee would hold an all-night dance, known as a saloli, in which conjurers sang and danced until dawn. During the dance, men and women played different roles, with the men singing and dancing to transfer power to their team, and the women singing and dancing to weaken the power of the opposing team. The dance was seen as a way to prepare both the players and the community for the upcoming game, and to honor the spirits that were believed to be present. During the game itself, the goal was to hit a ball made of deer skin or stuffed with hair through a goalpost using a wooden stick. The game was often played over large distances, with teams from different villages or even different tribes competing against each other. The game could be quite violent, with players using their sticks to hit each other in order to gain possession of the ball. But the game also had strict rules and was seen as a way to resolve conflicts peacefully. Cherokee stickball is still played today by many Cherokee communities as a way to honor their ancestors and preserve their culture. It continues to serve as a symbol of strength, athleticism, and unity, and it remains an important part of Cherokee courtship and matchmaking traditions. Women in charge. The Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, is a Native American tribe that lives in northeastern North America, mainly in present-day New York State. For the Haudenosaunee, it's the women who are in charge. Women are basically the ones choosing their partners, as opposed to the more common practice of men choosing their wives in most other societies. In Haudenosaunee culture, women wear the pants. They're highly respected and hold positions of authority. They have an important role in the clan and are responsible for nominating and selecting the male leaders who represent them in the council. Women are also responsible for the continuity of the clan lineage, and because of this, they have the power to choose their partners. When a woman is ready for marriage, she first seeks the advice of her clan mother, who then consults with the other female elders of the clan. They discuss potential suitors and evaluate their compatibility with the woman. Their choice takes into account factors like personality, character, reputation, and what kind of car he drives. Okay, maybe not the car part, but the cool thing is that it's less of a status game and more about finding a good match that benefits the couple and benefits the entire community. The elders consider the needs of the clan and the importance of maintaining balance and harmony within the community. Once a suitable match is identified, it's the woman who takes the initiative to court the man. She may offer him gifts like handmade clothing or jewelry, or start up some friendly conversation to get to know him better. If the man reciprocates her interest, then they'll most likely continue to court each other until they decide to marry. The Haudenosaunee also have played an important role in the women's suffrage movement in the United States. The Haudenosaunee influence on the movement started in the mid-19th century when prominent suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Joslyn Gage visited Haudenosaunee communities in New York State. They were impressed by the matrilineal traditions of the culture and how much power and sway the women held. These women were much more than housewives who couldn't vote. They were the ones doing the most important voting. Stanton and Gage used the Haudenosaunee as an example to argue that women were just as capable as men of holding leadership roles and making important decisions. They also used the Haudenosaunee model to criticize the patriarchal structure of American society, arguing that women's rights and leaderships should be recognized and supported. In 1920, the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified, granting women the right to vote, and the Haudenosaunee played an important role in that fight. Geronimo's Lost Love. Geronimo was one of the fiercest Native Americans of the 1800s. His life was marked by tragedy. Yet, despite this, he became a symbol of resistance against American and Mexican forces that were encroaching on southwestern Apache lands. And you can say that the loss of his first wife was the driving force behind his battles between both the Mexicans and the Americans. Geronimo was born in 1829 in present-day Arizona, and he grew up in a world of conflict as the Apache tribes fought to protect their land and way of life against Spanish, Mexican, and U.S. colonizers. As a young man, Geronimo became known as a skilled hunter and warrior and was chosen to lead war parties against rival tribes. In the 1850s, he fought against the Mexican army in a series of conflicts that became known as the Apache Wars. It was during this time that he gained a reputation for his bravery and cunning and became an important leader of the Apache people. In the 1870s, the United States government began to expand westward and the Apache tribes were forced to negotiate treaties and give up their lands. But a lot of Apache refused to accept these terms and continued to resist. Geronimo was one of the most vocal opponents of the U.S. and he led a series of campaigns against the U.S. Army. And Geronimo was creative in his resistance. He was known for his quick hit-and-run tactics, and his ability to evade capture became the stuff of legend. He was a master of guerrilla warfare and was able to adapt to the chaos of the battlefield. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Geronimo and his followers were able to stand strong. Let's talk about Geronimo's quest against the Mexicans and the Americans, which was most likely spurred by a tragic event early on in his life. When Geronimo married Alope, he was 17 years old. In southern Arizona, close to Clifton, he and his wife settled down close to his mother Juanita's wickiup. Alope was slender and fair, loyal and dutiful, according to Geronimo. The two had been in a relationship for a while, and he saw being married to her as the greatest joy offered to him. In 1846, the couple were married, and they moved into a wickiup made of buffalo hides. Spears, bows, and arrows, as well as bear and lion robes, were all throughout the interior of their house. Alope used intricate paintings done on buckskin and beading to decorate their home. Her artistic abilities also extended to the wickiup's canvas walls. In his autobiography, Geronimo, his own story, Geronimo bragged about how wonderful his wife Alope was. They were exceedingly content and continued the customs of their ancestors. Alope gave birth to 3 kids for Geronimo in the early years of their marriage. Later, when asked about his family, Geronimo described them as children that played, loitered, and worked as I had done. In 1851, Geronimo, his wife and children, and his mother were living in an Apache camp in Llanos, in the present-day Mexican state of Chihuahua. On March 5th, over 400 Mexican soldiers attacked the camp, ending the lives of everyone they could, including Geronimo's wife Alope, their 3 children, and his mother. Geronimo was able to escape, but the event obviously scarred him. The attack on Llanos became one of the main motivations behind his campaigns against both the Mexican and the U.S. armies. Geronimo would go on to have 5 other wives. Polygamy was an accepted practice among the Apache, and marriages were more like a thing to do rather than an eternal bond. Having multiple wives was actually seen as a sign of wealth and power in many Apache tribes, at least before the impact of colonization and forced assimilation efforts eroded certain traditional Apache culture and values. Test runs. The Apache and many other Native American tribes were much more liberal, in line with today's modern standard of dating, rather than the uptight Christian Europeans who started moving westward and encroaching on their lands. One example of this is the idea of trial marriages, aka shacking up. Trial marriages were practiced in many tribes across North America and were part of what was a generally more open and less demonized concept of sensuality and exploration among Native American tribes than the no intimate relations before marriage prudishness of their European counterparts. Let's look at the tribes of the Great Basin in the western United States, for example. These tribes included the likes of the Shoshone, the Paiute, and the Ute. These cultures were very much sensual egalitarian, meaning that man and woman can explore in that category. It was encouraged for younger people to have intimate relations with each other before marriage. It was just a normal part of growing up. If a young man and a young woman hit it off, their families might initiate a trial marriage where the two would live together for some time to see if they were compatible. The reason behind this practice was that sensual exploration and trial marriages allowed young men and women to gain experience and knowledge about relationships and physical touch, and to learn how to form successful partnerships. It also allowed for a more egalitarian approach to courtship and marriage where both partners had equal say in the decision-making process. In the end, Trial marriages were a way for many North American cultures to celebrate and explore the human experience of love and partnership. Cynthia Ann Parker, the White Comanche. This next one is either a textbook case of Stockholm Syndrome or one of the most bizarre love stories of the American West, or maybe both. The marriage of Cynthia Ann Parker, a white woman, and Pettinacona, a Comanche chief, was anything but traditional. In 1836, when Cynthia Ann Parker was just 9 years old, a group of Comanche warriors raided Fort Parker, Texas, a town that Cynthia and her family had moved to a few years earlier. During the raid, Cynthia was captured and most of her family lost their lives. Cynthia Parker was taken by the Comanche and ended up being raised as a member of the tribe. She was given the name Naua, and she learned to speak the Comanche language and adopted their customs and way of life. She ended up marrying a guy named Pettinacona, one of the most powerful Comanche chiefs at the time. He had already had a few wives, but he was so enamored by Cynthia Parker that he apparently never took another one. It was common at the time for Comanche men to have multiple wives, so Cynthia Parker must have been a real catch. The marriage was most likely arranged by Pettinacona's father, Chief Iron Jacket, who was another powerful leader among the Comanches. In a traditional wedding ceremony, the man would normally need to prove himself to the woman's family. Maybe gifts would be exchanged between families, or the man would demonstrate how good he was at hunting. But seeing as how Parker was basically kidnapped, that tradition probably went out the window. In some Southern Plains tribes, the Comanche included, marriage was sometimes as simple as the man and the woman just deciding to live together and the rest of the community accepting that they were now married. However it went down, Cynthia Ann and Petta reportedly had quite a happy marriage and had a few children, including Quanah Parker, who would go on to become one of the most famous Comanche warriors of all time. The marriage between the two could be seen as an important symbol for unity between the Comanches and the white settlers of Texas. However, it was a controversial union, as some white settlers believed that Cynthia Ann Parker had been stolen from her family and forced into the marriage. But it didn't seem like Cynthia was being held captive. There were several attempts to rescue her over the years, but she apparently refused to return to her family. Eventually, in 1860, a group of Texas Rangers found out where Nacona's band was after they raided Fort Parker again, a town that, by the way, had been named in honor of Cynthia and her family. After fleeing from the town, the Rangers eventually figured out where Nacona and his people were and attacked. Nacona was killed trying to escape with Cynthia and their children. Cynthia was eventually reunited with her family, but after 25 years of life as a Comanche, she didn't readjust well to white culture. She had become a bit of a celebrity and was granted a bunch of land by the U.S. government and given a monthly salary, but she was torn up about the death of her husband. Two of her sons would end up dying while fighting against the U.S. Army, and she too died just a few years later at the age of 45 after struggling to reconcile her two identities as a white woman and a Comanche captive. Love on the Mississippi. Close your eyes and imagine traveling down the Mississippi River 1,000 years ago. What do you think you'd see? Some trees? Maybe a small Native American village or two? Well, think again. The Mississippi River was the thriving home to multiple cities and millions of people. The native Mississippian culture lasted from around 800 to 1600 AD. They built cities along the river and mound pyramids too, lots of them. In a way, the Mississippi River was to the Mississippians what the Nile River was to the Egyptians. There were multiple civilizations that sprung up during this time along different sections of the river. If you were to meander down the Mississippi back then, you would pass by fortified cities along the banks, and if you were lucky enough to not get shot at, you'd discover complex societies with elaborate mythologies. Some of those mythologies revolved around love, marriage, and complicated love triangles. There's a popular myth that made the rounds throughout both North and South America that involves brothers known as the hero twins. The hero twins are typically opposites in character, with one representing the positive, life-giving force and the other representing the negative, destructive force. Despite their differences, they always seem to work together to overcome a series of obstacles and defeat different supernatural enemies. The Mississippian hero twins are called Thunder Boy and Lightning Boy. While a lot of their escapades involve beheading, death, and destruction, there's also a good deal of love. One example is connected to the Cherokee myth of the two brothers, where the brothers fall in love with a beautiful woman who was also fancied by the sun god. Now, to win her hand in marriage, the brothers had to complete a series of challenges given to them by the sun god, including hunting and farming tasks. Eventually, the older brother wins her hand in marriage, and the younger brother marries her sister. I'm guessing that's a win-win? Then there's the story of the Corn Maiden. The Mississippians and many other Native American cultures had various versions of the story. It's basically a creation story about the origins of corn and the importance of respecting the natural world. But there are also some juicy love and marriage bits in there too. The Corn Maiden is a beautiful woman associated with fertility and the corn harvest. In some versions, she's the daughter of the Sun Father who created her from cornmeal. And he did a really good job creating her because her beauty had all the men in the tribe wanting to marry her. But she didn't want to get distracted from her job of making sure the crops grew each season. Making love and nations. Marriage has historically been a way to unite two clans, tribes, or noble families, a way to strengthen both sides and often consolidate power. Think the marriage between Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella of Castile that united Spain and helped fuel the Spanish Inquisition, or the marriage between Prince Henry and Meghan Markle that helped create a Netflix series and a hilarious South Park parody. Marriage has also played an important role in nation building and strengthening connections between different tribes and Native American societies. In many Native American cultures, marriage was seen as a way to create alliances between different tribes and to strengthen social ties within a community. Now, even though we mentioned that a lot of Native Americans were certainly more open in many ways in terms of premarital relations and had more egalitarian social structures between men and women, there were still arranged marriages. In many Native American cultures, marriages were arranged by the parents or other elders in the community. These marriages were often used to create alliances between different tribes or to strengthen ties between families within a tribe. The goal was to create a network of relationships that could be used for trade, defense, or other forms of cooperation. Another way that marriage was used for nation building was through intermarriage between different tribes. In many cases, intermarriage acted as a way to create a sense of unity and shared identity between different tribes. This was particularly important in situations where tribes had a history of conflict and looked at each other with contempt. By intermarrying, tribes could build trust and cooperation that could help to resolve conflicts down the road and promote peace, love, harmony, and all that. Marriage was also used as a way to help bridge the gap between Native Americans and European colonizers, although it didn't always go as planned. One significant marriage was that of Sacagawea to a French-Canadian trader named Toussaint Charbonneau. Sacagawea was born into the Lemhi-Shoshone tribe in what's now Idaho around 1788, but when she was about 10 years old, a group of Hidatsa warriors raided her village and captured her and several other girls. The Hidatsa were a neighboring tribe to the Shoshone, and they did not get along at all. Some say Sacagawea was then sold to Charbonneau, who wanted a second wife. Others say he won her in a card game. Either way, it seems to have been pretty forced, but it did help strengthen some bonds between the white race and the Shoshone and Hidatsa. During their famed Western expedition, Lewis and Clark ended up hiring Charbonneau, and Sacagawea was an instrumental part of their successful expedition out west. But there have been other cases where white native intermarriage was very much taboo. One guy who worked really hard to prevent it was a Cherokee chief named John Ross. Now you might be thinking, John Ross? That don't sound Cherokee. You're right. Ross was born to a Cherokee mother and a Scottish father. Now despite that, and despite eventually marrying a white woman himself, Ross was staunchly opposed to intermarriage between Cherokee women and non-Cherokee men. At the time, the Cherokee Nation was in the process of modernizing and trying to establish itself as a sovereign nation. One of the ways that the Cherokee leadership sought to achieve this was by adopting the ways of the white settlers and embracing a system of private property and slavery. This adoption of white culture also included the concept of racial purity and the belief that mixing races would be detrimental to the Cherokee Nation. Ross worked hard at codifying these ideas into law. In 1839, he signed a bill that restricted marriage between Cherokee women and non-Cherokee men. The whole thing was based on the belief that Cherokee women were being taken advantage of by non-Cherokee men who were marrying them for their land and resources. The law stated that any white man who married a Cherokee woman would be expelled from the Cherokee Nation, and any Cherokee woman who married a non-Cherokee man would forfeit her citizenship rights and be expelled from the nation. This law was not just aimed at white men, but also African American men and men of other Native American tribes. Not all is fair in love and marriage. Luckily, the law didn't stick around long and was repealed in 1866. What else do you want to know about love and marriage in Native American culture? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history.